Tuesday. We all go to bed on Monday. Tuesday's the big day. I know millions and millions of people were looking forward to it. I actually didn't submit my ballot early. And voting day is always the same for me, no matter if it's a small election or one of these big elections. I've had the same tradition for like the last 6 years since I started Find in Seattle. And this was the first one that was different. I guess the last primary here in Seattle was the first one that was different. But usually, Amanda and I, we always go out to dinner and we fill out our ballot like at a local business, right? We sit at dinner, we have dinner, we always have the books that we get our mail in, and we like fill it out and we have a discussion. And it's always like, it's always just like a fun night. And I've always promoted that on my stories. And this year, obviously very different. I ain't going out and sitting at a restaurant to fill out this ballot. But same thing, I filled it all out. We did a similar thing at home. And I always just love walking to that mailbox, right? On election day, like first thing in the morning, always documented a little bit on my story. And so put my ballot in the mailbox. Great to see. A lot less crowded than the mailboxes normally are. Usually there's like a line of people just waiting to drop it in the mailbox. But so many people voted early. And we get home and I like create a whole schedule for Tuesday to distract me, right? I was like, there's no point in looking at any of this news or any of the information until at least 8 p.m. So I like stacked up my whole day with like meetings and activities and things to do. And between 8 p.m. and midnight, though, was just dead staring at the TV, right? Watching number by number by number coming in, like cheering, like getting nervous. You experience all of the emotions in one day, especially with seeing how things were getting counted, right? And some of the, like, no one really knew how they were going to count the election. I mean, you could if you did the research, but I wasn't aware of like, oh, every state's going to do this differently. I think we should have assumed that by our other conversation that everyone does voting differently. But it was crazy to watch. Like some states decided to do the early votes and mail-in ballots first, and some did them later. And so to see all the change, and for a lot of Tuesday night, I was preparing myself for a Trump victory. It was starting to look that way very, very early on to me, especially when he got Florida in a handily way. It was a little concerning for me. And then on Tuesday night, right, so it's like midnight, and it's like, all right, we're definitely not going to get the results tonight. Amanda had this big debate about what we're going to do, because the one thing I didn't want to do is wake up on Wednesday and like take an adrenaline shot of fear or excitement based off the election results. So like I intentionally didn't sleep by my phone. I put my phone out in the living room, and I didn't want to wake up and like go look at it. Amanda had a very different opinion of doing that, but I woke up on Wednesday and I prepared myself. Like I sat there for a couple of minutes, like, all right, we're going to walk out to this living room and like, we're going to figure out the future of the world. And I walked down and was like, nothing had changed, right? Like not very many votes had been counted in the morning. And then that kept going on. But I spent the next 4 days, like just staring, going back between CNN, ABC, NBC, and Fox News just to see like what all the different mainstream media perspectives were, every single day, right? And I would say Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of that week, my productivity was extremely low. Didn't really do anything. I couldn't think about anything else, right? Like it was just constantly like, how many votes came in from what state? What's Arizona doing? What's Nevada doing? What's Pennsylvania doing? Where's Georgia? Joe's coming back in Georgia. Go Georgia, go Georgia. Like it was now in hindsight, it was the most entertaining sport I've ever watched. Like I'm glad that I can feel that way now, because when I went to bed on Tuesday, I was really worried that the election was going to go a different direction. And it's nice to feel like, okay, at least we had this small win, and looking back, it was like, oh, that was a great World Series of back and forth. And it felt like a sporting event, the way the numbers came in. It was exciting and terrifying all at the same time. So how was it for you?
No, it was very similar. It's just funny. I was just like I'm laughing at all of this because I felt a lot of those emotions. And I would say something, okay, so the first thing I actually want to ask about here is, what did you eat because you said you didn't go to a restaurant. So what did you eat? Did you get like Uber Eats, or did you do takeout, or?
I actually don't remember.
Oh,
Gosh,
wow.
I didn't like do an intentional meal this time. The whole
Okay.
process was really like thrown off. Yeah, usually I'm very intentional about where I choose, but
Yeah.
even with Find Me in Seattle, my intention with eating has kind of like gone out the drain. I can't remember what I had yesterday. It's all like,
Well,
I'm not sure what I ate on Monday night this
okay.
last week.
Well, yeah, I guess most people probably can't remember what they ate. The only reason I asked was because you mentioned, I remember exactly what I had on Tuesday night, but last week. But the reason why I was asking that is because I know that you mentioned that it's a part of a ritual. And so I thought, well, maybe there was some intentional meal that you had that you just got it a different way. And you posted something recently that is still on my mind. I don't know how to find it here, but you went to this Thai food truck, and that food looked so good that I missed good Thai food, because Seattle has great Thai, actually.
Great Thai food.
And I don't know where to find that around here. So I was hoping maybe you were going to say you had Thai.
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I eat Thai food every single week, like almost guaranteed. My wife is from Thai descent. Her mom is from Thailand, and so and I live within like 4 blocks. I have 5 Thai restaurants, so we pretty much like have we have a dish that we love at each one. They kind of all have their specialty in our eyes now. But when you get back, we'll have to go eat some Thai food when it's safe to do so.
Yeah, well, I definitely have some spots that I like. So, yeah, we can get into that another time.
Yeah.
Because I could go all day about these places. So, all right. So the other thing I wanted to mention that you brought up was a part of my feeling as I was watching these results, just like everyone else. I think to your something you said as well, that, productivity was down. I mean, I think that was true. Like, I was, of course, I work from home, and I'm online and video calling with my coworkers all day, and that's all everyone was talking about was what did you hear, when was the last update, what state just said what, and it was just all consuming for the last week, and nothing changed. That was the crazy part. Nothing changed for days. Like, we didn't get another update until Saturday, and so it was like Tuesday and then nothing. And it was like, okay, it's 253. It's still 253. The number is 253 for electoral votes for Biden. The number, nothing changed. It just didn't move. And it was like time just stood still for 3-4 days. Now, in that time, I really learned a lot about how other states run their electoral systems. It was fascinating to me to listen to the press conferences from the different election officials from every state, because what it pointed out to me very clearly, you know how I am about like things need to have standard processes. That is a risk, I think, to our system. The decentralized nature of it, I actually think, is a strength of our system, that it is decentralized like that. But the variation, I think, is a problem, because people don't know how it works. Like, you may or may not know how it works in your state, right? The electoral system. But this is a group project. And what I felt like was this was the worst group project in the history of group projects, because as you're sitting there, you're like, okay, well, Washington State, we did our part. Texas, we did our part. California, we did our part. What's going on with Arizona? Like, hey, we're waiting for you to turn in your part of the project. Georgia, come on, pick it up. Like, that is the issue with this. And the reason why things were slow, to your point about the variation in the processes, it has to do with just that like Pennsylvania by law could not start counting mail-in ballots until midnight on election day, whereas other states were counting mail-in ballots first. Some states decided we will count all of the in-person election day first, and then we'll count all of the mail-in and early voting after. I mean, it's ridiculous, because in that gap of time that we're all sitting there, or all of us around the country waiting for these results, you have conspiracy theories. You had people showing up to the polling locations with, banging on the window saying, let us in. Their accusations of voter fraud. Like, that's the problem. That's why you need to have a standard process that everyone can understand and can be transparent. Now, yes, there was great transparency because there were video cameras inside of these polling places. People are counting, and you can watch on live TV. Live TV, they were showing people counting votes. When have you ever seen that? Like, that was what the story was, and you're sitting there watching on CNN, someone just sitting there counting votes by hand. Okay, that's great. I'm glad we have that level of transparency. But we need a standard process across the country so that people can continue to believe that the system is working. And what I was most concerned about was that there were too many people questioning, is this system working properly? And once you start to have people lose trust in the system, and it actually threatens, I say, the whole thing, right? Like all of democracy. If you cannot trust that your vote is going to be counted. And on the flip side, right, the lawsuits that were going on immediately, which we knew were coming. Those lawsuits were very clearly targeting the places where vote counting was happening, and the goal was to get those votes thrown out. And the goal very specifically was to stop counting, stop counting in a democracy, stop counting votes. That, to me, right there, I was so. I didn't even know how to feel about that. At the moment, I was like, I can't even believe this is happening. Like, I still can't even believe. I was listening to a podcast this morning about a poll. I don't know if she was an election. I guess she was an election official in Detroit, and her, sort of documenting her memory of her day and week, kind of dealing with people showing up to the polling location and threatening her and all of these things. And they actually played some of the sound during the podcast, and I just thought to myself, this is crazy. This is going beyond just being upset at the results, because what she also pointed out was something that I hadn't thought about. She said, I'm in Detroit, and while in Detroit, this is a city that is blue, and in a county that ultimately is blue. The same thing that happened there happened in other cities that have large African American populations. That's number one. So that happened in Philly, that happened in Atlanta, happened in Detroit. Okay, so these are all of the places where we're waiting for votes to be counted. But also, what she mentioned about Detroit, she said, they didn't go to Ann Arbor, right? They didn't go to Ann Arbor, Michigan, where there's a lot of liberal, white professors, and they also voted blue there. They didn't go there. And then she mentioned another city that I'm not familiar with, and she said, there are a lot of wealthy people there that also voted blue. They didn't go to those places, and those places have smaller African American populations. And so the only conclusion one can draw is that your argument for stopping the count, your argument for voter fraud, is targeted towards African American voters. You are trying to suppress the vote of African American voters, which is exactly what we have been dealing with since the very beginning of the right to vote for African Americans in this country. So I think me seeing that may have been a little bit different maybe than how other people saw it, but I just saw, here comes history repeating itself and showing up again and again and again and again. And right now in this moment, I'm watching it on live TV, and it was frightening. I guess maybe that is the best way I can put it.
Yeah, it totally was. And for the accusations coming out from the president, right, with very little evidence. So let's say the president and a lot of his staff and his children, right, putting out all these conspiracy theories, where in one state we have protesters who show up to the polling stations in Pennsylvania or Philadelphia, I believe it's Philadelphia, and they're banging on the windows, right, saying stop the count. And then conversely, we have Arizona, where a bunch of protesters, let's point out, all these protesters are white. They show up to Arizona, and they're marching outside the polling stations, and they're saying count the vote. Right? Because at this point, Joe Biden has the lead by 400,000 there. So we've got people who are on the same side who mostly voted for the same person, chanting the exact opposite things on their side. And it's when you're watching it and you're seeing them cut back and forth between these two, it's mind blowing, right? And at the same time, I know I don't want to talk about Donald Trump, but his terribleness needs to be mentioned for the sake of history, right? He's declaring victory on Tuesday, right? Saying that he should win because he's ahead by so many votes. At the same time, saying, oh, and there's all of this fraud happening, right? But the votes that haven't been counted in Arizona, those are legitimate. But the votes that haven't been counted in Pennsylvania, those are illegitimate, right? Mm-hmm. And he's contradicting himself and just putting out all this information that is just not true. There's no proof. There's no evidence. And all these are coming out on Twitter. Twitter's flagging every single post. So when you go to Donald Trump's Twitter, all it is blank tweets that you have to opt in to view because he's just spewing nonsense and
he's lying.
He's lying. He's lying, and he's just puking nonsense all over the internet for everyone to see. And yeah, absolutely despicable. Not presidential at all. And yeah, just.
And Conner, we should note, as we sit here, more than a week past the election, he still has not conceded.
He has not conceded yet, and a lot of people in his party have also not conceded, right? They haven't congratulated Joe Biden. Almost the entire world, and at least in the perspective of leadership, have acknowledged that Joe Biden is the president-elect. And we have things going on right now up to, at this point, when Donald Trump won 4 years ago, he started getting the presidential security briefings in the morning every day. Donald Trump's not, supposedly, from what I've read, he doesn't read those anyways anymore. But Joe Biden still hasn't gotten some of that information, right? And so Donald Trump is doing everything he can to entertain himself, right, with no evidence, no support. What he's putting out in the world is also not what's being reflected in the courts either. I know Wall Street Journal reported yesterday about how a lot of the court filings that are being submitted don't match up with what Donald Trump's saying, right? Just because there's not really any evidence, right?
There's no evidence.
There's no evidence. It's really just appealing to the conspiracy side of his base and trying to build that up. And he's treating America like it's a game show and not, our democracy on the line.
What game show? Is it Survivor? Is it Big Brother? I'm sure. Is it Real Housewives? I'm trying to figure out what show are we talking about? Because remember he's the reality show president. He was on one of the biggest he was the star of one of the biggest reality shows at the time that it was on TV, right before he became president, and so. Is it The Apprentice? Is this The Apprentice? Because if this is The Apprentice, then the American people just told him he's fired. That was his big catchphrase, right? You're fired. Well, the American people, at least half of them, the half that voted for Biden, they voted. I've said this before. I don't know if I said this on the show or not, but I've said before that I don't know that always in this situation that people were voting for Joe Biden as much as they were voting against Donald Trump. And I think for the half of America that voted against Donald Trump, I think that is significant. And the message is you're fired. And that is the whole point of democracy, right? That is what we're allowed to do in the democracy. That's why we vote. If we didn't have a system like this, then we would just get who is selected for us. And in this particular case, the system, as it is designed, flaws and all, it seems to have worked for the half that showed up to vote. But there are always going to be sore losers out there in the world. And, I think for me, I looked at two things, right? How you end up with a Donald Trump has everything to do with how the system is designed, and also how you end up with a Joe Biden has everything to do with how the system is designed. And so I think there's still going to be a lot of unsatisfied voters out there on both sides. And I don't mean that they're the same group of people necessarily, but by that I mean, if you voted for Trump, you had a very clear reason why you voted for Trump, and he's not going to be the president. If you voted for Biden, that doesn't necessarily mean you voted for him because he was the person you wanted to see elected as president. He was the option that you had who was not Donald Trump. Yeah. So you may not be satisfied with his administration, right? So if you're not satisfied with his administration, what are you going to spend your time thinking about and working on? And that, for me, I think is probably the bigger conversation that we are not having right now, is that, on last Saturday, Joe Biden was declared the winner. But what I saw was people in the streets. I saw people dancing, people having a wonderful time, because in that moment, I think that they were celebrating the fact that the half of the country that voted against Donald Trump won. Their voices were heard. They were able, all the organizing that has happened, all of the posts on social media saying, go vote, go vote, go vote. We talked about that last episode. It worked. Everything worked. We had the biggest turnout in the history of the country, right? On both sides.
On both sides, yeah.
On both sides. But now, what policy do you care about? How do you want to see that enacted, right? Or what do you want to see happen now? And I think if your number one issue is, say, coronavirus, well, we'll probably see some immediate changes there. If your number one issue is, say, systemic racism, I don't know. That might not be your ticket that's going to get you what you want. Yeah. If your number one issue is climate change, might be a little progress, a little. But I think this is where I see things starting to be very challenging in the next 4 years. Also, I should mention, right, we have, we're going to talk about Georgia in a minute, but we also have a runoff race there that is very significant that's coming. So we still don't know what is the balance of power going to look like in the Senate. So when we think about there is more work to do, it's all of that stuff, right? There's still more work to do. But coming back to just the feeling, one other thing I wanted to point out, just the feeling of last week before we get into where we are today. The other thing that I want to point out to the folks who are listening to our program in the future is that what I hope comes out of this, and what I hope starts to show up, and maybe I'll be a part of helping to make this happen through my efforts in the tech space, is that it is easy to look at a map of America and say, well, I live in this state, and I only need to care about my own voting system or my own problems that exist here. But if you look at coronavirus, we're all in this together. If you look at climate change, we are all in this together. If you look at systemic racism, we are all in this together. So it doesn't matter what your issue is. What actually is really important is that you have an understanding of who the other members of the group are that you have to work with to get the project done. And so when I think about, the fact that sure, Washington State can vote blue. California can vote blue. Texas didn't vote blue. So if you are looking for a blue candidate to win the presidency, you're reliant upon other states doing their work. But if you don't understand that and understand how to support that, then you run the risk of having another version or even the same version of a Trump presidency, because the system itself is the same. It has not evolved at all in the entire 4 years. We've been witnessing what looks like, to me and to many people,